At 9 o'clock on the morning of August 17th, 1943, roughly 60 Japanese Army aircraft sat on the runway and taxiways at Borum Airfield, near Wewak, on the northern coast of New Guinea. Their engines were already running. Ground crews had been working since before dawn. Fuel tanks were full. Weapons were loaded. Pilots were close to their cockpits. The aircraft were lined up in takeoff order for a strike against a new Allied fighter base hidden inland near Lae. That mission never left the ground, because while those engines warmed at Borum, the aircraft sent to destroy them were already coming in from the very airfield Japan had found too late. In 5 days, the Japanese 4th Air Army would lose 174 of 200 aircraft in the Wewak area, 54 shot down, 16 blown apart, 57 damaged so badly they could not fly, 47 more damaged enough to matter. And the strange part is this: the disaster was not created by a new bomber, a miracle fighter, or a bigger force. It was created by a runway. A hidden runway in the jungle, a decoy airfield built to be bombed, and a commander who understood that range was not a line on a map. It was a problem you could move. To see why 60 Japanese aircraft were warming their engines for an attack that arrived before theirs did, the story has to begin 5 months earlier in the water north of New Guinea. In March of 1943, Japan tried to reinforce Lae by sea. 8 troop transports and 8 destroyers left Rabaul with thousands of soldiers aboard. Lae was under pressure. The Japanese garrison needed men, weapons, and food, and the sea route seemed like the only way to move enough of all three. Then the convoy entered range of the United States 5th Air Force and the Royal Australian Air Force. For 3 days, Allied aircraft hit the ships again and again. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea became one of the most decisive air-sea attacks of the Pacific War. 7 of the 8 transports were sunk. 4 destroyers were lost. Thousands of Japanese soldiers died before they ever reached the battlefield they had been sent to reinforce. After that, one conclusion became impossible for Japanese planners to avoid. The sea road to Lae had been closed by Allied air power. If Japan wanted to hold eastern New Guinea, it would have to supply and defend the area by air, or try to move men through terrain that swallowed armies one ridge at a time. So Japan built up air strength farther west, around Wewak. Wewak looked safe. That was the whole point. It sat roughly 400 miles from the Allied fighter bases, then operating in southeastern New Guinea. Bombers could reach it, but bombers without fighter escort were vulnerable. P-38 Lightnings could not simply fly from the old bases to Wewak, fight over the target, and come home with fuel to spare. On the Japanese map, Wewak sat outside the circle. That circle was the safety margin, and in war, safety margins become habits. The man trying to break that habit was General George Kenney, the American air commander under Douglas MacArthur. Kenney was not the kind of commander who treated distance as a law of nature. He had already changed the way his aircraft fought. His B-25 Mitchells had been modified with heavy forward-firing machine guns. His crews had learned skip bombing against ships. His technical teams had developed parafrag bombs, small parachute-retarded explosives that could be dropped from extremely low altitude without blowing the attacking bomber out of the sky. Again and again, Kenney looked at a fixed limitation and asked the same question: what part of this is actually fixed? At Wewak, the fixed thing was supposed to be fighter range, so he stopped trying to stretch the fighters. He moved the runway. In June 1943, Allied engineers pushed into the jungle near Tsili Tsili, south of Lae. The place was close enough to change the geometry of the whole campaign, and dangerous enough that if Japanese reconnaissance found it early, the project could be destroyed before it mattered. The crews worked under canopy. Equipment was hidden when it was not moving. Construction was kept as invisible as men, machines, and jungle mud could make it. And nearby, the Allies built something else, a fake airfield. At Bina Bina, crews made a conspicuous scar in the landscape. They moved equipment where it could be seen. They raised dust. They created exactly the kind of activity a reconnaissance pilot expected to photograph. Japan saw the decoy. Japan bombed the decoy. The real field kept growing under the jungle cover. By July 26th, P-38 fighters were operating from Tsili Tsili. That single fact changed the war around Wewak. The Japanese did not yet understand how much it had changed, because their safety calculation had been correct yesterday. Wewak had been outside Allied fighter range yesterday. Its 4 airfields could concentrate aircraft there yesterday. Its squadrons could prepare a major offensive from there yesterday. But yesterday's map is one of the most dangerous things a commander can trust. By early August, the Japanese 4th Air Army had concentrated a large force in the Wewak complex. Borum, Wewak, Dagua, and Butt. The aircraft were not parked there as decoration. They were being gathered for a purpose. Japan had discovered that an Allied fighter base existed near Leh, and on August 14th, Japanese aircraft began attacking Tsili Tsili. The 4th Air Army was preparing a sustained offensive to destroy it before it could be used to break Wewak's safety margin. But that meant the Japanese force had to do something dangerous. It had to concentrate. Fuel trucks moved toward aircraft. Ordnance came out to the flight lines. Ground crews worked longer and faster. Airframes were lined up to be serviced, armed, fueled, and launched. From above, reconnaissance photographs did not just show that aircraft were present. They showed that something was about to happen. Kenney read the pattern, not as a static target, as a countdown. The strike began in darkness. Between the night of August 16th and the early hours of August 17th, heavy bombers lifted from the Port Moresby area and crossed the mountains toward the north coast. Their job was not to finish Wewak in one blow. Their job was to start fires, damage aircraft, shake the fields awake, and destroy the clean alert margin the Japanese needed for the morning. They hit before dawn. Then, at 9 in the morning, the main blow came in low. More than 30 B-25 Mitchells, escorted by P-38 Lightnings from Tsili Tsili, came over the fields at roughly 30 to 50 feet. 30 to 50 feet is not an altitude. It is a dare. At that height, crews could see the shape of aircraft on the ground. They could see revetments, propellers, vehicles, men running, and smoke from the earlier attack. The B-25s carried parafrag bombs, the weapon Kenney's teams had built for exactly this problem. A normal bomb dropped that low could destroy the attacker with its own fragments. A parafrag bomb opened a small parachute after release. It slowed. The bomber escaped forward. Then the bomb detonated among aircraft that were packed with fuel, ammunition, and men. At Borum, the timing was almost impossible to believe. Approximately 60 Japanese aircraft were warming their engines for a mission against Tsili Tsili. Their propellers were turning. Their crews were in the final motions before launch. Some aircraft tried to take off. They were hit during the roll. Others remained in line and were destroyed where they sat. The planes sent to destroy Tsili Tsili were destroyed because Tsili Tsili already existed. That was the trap. Not a trap made of wire. Not a trap dug in the ground. A trap made of geography. The Fourth Air Army had not been a weak collection of leftovers. It included frontline Japanese Army aircraft, Ki-43 Oscars, nimble and dangerous in the hands of experienced pilots, Ki-61 Tonys, among the more modern fighters available to the Japanese Army at that stage, twin-engine aircraft, bombers, reconnaissance machines, and the ground structure needed to keep them moving. But New Guinea punished machines and men before the enemy ever appeared. Illness cut into aircrew strength. Replacement parts were short. Aircraft that looked assigned on paper were not always ready to fly. By mid-August, the force around Wewak had perhaps 130 aircraft operational out of a much larger total. That was still enough for a serious offensive. If it launched first, it did not. The second day proved the Japanese still had teeth. On August 18th, Allied attack groups returned. This time, Japanese fighters got into the air in greater numbers. The fighting was real, and Allied losses came. But the shape of the battle had changed. The first blow had shattered the best chance Japan had to meet the raids with an organized, prepared air force. The surviving aircraft had been moved into dispersal areas and revetments. The B-25s went looking for them. The P-38s hunted whatever lifted off. The Wewak complex was no longer an offensive base preparing to strike. It was a wounded system trying to save pieces of itself. Further raids followed on August 20th and August 21st. By the end of the 5-day operation, the accounting was brutal. Out of 200 Japanese aircraft in the Wewak area, 174 had been put out of action. 54 were shot down, 16 were blown up, 57 were badly damaged, 47 were slightly damaged. The operational strength of the Fourth Air Army fell from roughly 130 flyable aircraft before the raids to about 30 afterward. Numbers like that can make the event feel clean. It was not clean. Airfields are not just aircraft parked on dirt and coral. They are fuel crews, armorers, engine mechanics, radio men, truck drivers, clerks, officers, pilots, and tired ground personnel doing the invisible labor that lets an aircraft become a weapon. At Borum on the morning of August 17th, many of those men were exactly where the parafrag pattern was designed to fall. Near the aircraft, near the fuel, near the ordnance, inside the machinery of the launch. An air army cannot replace that kind of experience overnight. A pilot can be reassigned. An aircraft can be shipped forward. But a forward air force that loses mechanics, armorers, and maintenance specialists loses the hands that turn spare parts into sorties. A Japanese staff officer later summarized the failure with a sentence that sounded simple, but carried the whole disaster inside it. Their defenses were not alert. That did not mean no one was awake. It meant the force was facing the wrong moment. The Fourth Air Army was organized to launch, not to receive. Its ground crews were working outward toward departure. Its aircraft were concentrated for efficiency. Its commanders were preparing an offensive against the airfield they now knew existed, and Kenney struck during the fragile overlap between discovery and response. Japan had found Tsili Tsili on August 14th. The strike on Wewak came on August 17th. 3 days. That was the margin. The irony of Wewak is that Japan's logic was not foolish. Concentrating aircraft there had made sense when Wewak lay beyond Allied fighter reach. Preparing to destroy Tsili Tsili made sense once the new field was discovered. Lining aircraft for rapid launch made sense if the goal was to put a large strike package into the air. Each decision was rational inside the old geometry. Kenney had changed the geometry. That is why the defeat was so severe. The Japanese were not punished because they ignored the map. They were punished because they trusted a map that had expired. 4 forces came together at Wewak. First, Tsili Tsili solved the range problem. Without that hidden airstrip, the P-38 escorts could not do the job in the same way. Low-flying B-25s attacking defended airfields needed fighter cover. The runway in the jungle gave them that cover. Second, Japan concentrated its aircraft at the worst possible time. The aircraft were packed for operation, not survival. Fuel and weapons made them more vulnerable. Ground crews were present in numbers. The entire airfield system was compressed into a target. Third, the parafrag bomb solved the low-altitude delivery problem. It allowed the B-25s to fly almost at treetop height and still survive the blast pattern they were creating. Fourth, the pre-dawn heavy bomber strike stripped away the warning margin. By the time the low-level attack arrived, the Japanese fields had already been hit, disrupted, and forced into confusion. None of those factors alone explains Wewak. Together, they turned an air force into wreckage. And the consequence showed itself almost immediately. On September 4, 1943, Allied forces landed near Leh. The landing was not uncontested on the ground, but it came with something every amphibious commander wants and few get cheaply. No meaningful Japanese air opposition. The next day at Nadzab, American paratroopers jumped into the Markham Valley from C-47 transports in one of the most successful airborne operations of the Pacific War. General MacArthur and General Kenney observed from aircraft above the drop zone. The jump, the landing, the seizure of Leh, and the collapse of Japanese mobility along that part of the coast did not happen because Wewak was the only factor. But Wewak changed the terms. It removed the air threat at the moment the Allies needed freedom of movement. It meant men went ashore without the full weight of Japanese aircraft falling on them. It meant transports and landing craft could move through a different kind of sky. War histories often remember the ground taken. They remember Leh. They remember the paratroopers at Nadzab. They remember MacArthur watching the operation from above. But before those men moved, someone had to make the sky usable. At Wewak, that work had already been done, not by one spectacular duel in the air, not by a single heroic aircraft, but by a chain of practical decisions. Build the hidden field, build the decoy, move the fighters, read the photographs, strike before the enemy can launch. Use the weapon designed for the exact target. Return until the Air Force is no longer an Air Force. The 4th Air Army would receive replacements later. Aircraft came forward. Units were rebuilt in pieces. The Japanese could still fight, and they did. But the force that sat at Wewak in August 1943, ready to challenge Allied air superiority in New Guinea, never returned to that same strength. Its offensive moment had been destroyed while its engines were warming. That is the real lesson of Wewak. A battle can be decided before the first bomb falls. It can be decided when an engineer chooses a hidden strip of jungle, when a decoy convinces the enemy to waste his raids, when a commander refuses to treat distance as permanent, when an opponent concentrates aircraft because yesterday the numbers said he was safe. At 9 in the morning on August 17th, the Japanese pilots at Borum were preparing to attack a runway. What they did not know was that the runway had already attacked them. They thought they were outside the circle. Kenney moved the circle.